Some songs never really leave the room. Even after the record stops spinning, something in the air still remembers. Tonight, we're remembering a handful of legendary voices from the world of R&B. Artists whose music shaped the sound of their era and whose lives ended far too soon because of overdose. Their records filled dance floors, late-night radios, and quiet living rooms. But behind those unforgettable voices were human stories, sometimes heavier than the melodies we loved. For many of us, these songs were part of our lives, playing during first loves, long drives, or evenings when the world finally slowed down. The music stayed strong, even when the people who made it were carrying more than we ever knew. And by the time we reach the final name tonight, you may find yourself remembering not just the music, but where you were when you first heard it. Let's begin with a voice that carried both power and deep vulnerability. Number 10, I Try by Macy Gray.
Believe that fate has brought us here.
When this song first drifted onto the airwaves around the turn of the millennium, it sounded different from almost everything else on the radio. The year was 1999. R&B was polished and confident, leaning into glossy production and smooth vocal perfection.
May appear to be free, but I'm just...
And then came a voice that felt wonderfully imperfect, raspy, emotional, almost fragile at times. It stopped people mid-conversation the first time they heard it. I Tried became the record that introduced the world to Macy Gray's unmistakable tone. It didn't shout for attention. Instead, it unfolded slowly, like a confession you hear late at night when the world has grown quiet.
I try to say goodbye and I try to walk away.
What made the performance so memorable was the honesty in that voice. She never sang like someone trying to impress an audience. It always felt like she was simply telling the truth, even if the truth trembled a little. The song itself spoke about something deeply human, loving someone enough to stay, even when pride says you should walk away. Most listeners knew that feeling. Many had lived it, and that's why the record stayed with people. It wasn't just a hit. It felt like a moment of emotional recognition. Sometimes the most powerful voices in music aren't the smoothest ones. They're the ones that sound like they've lived a little. Number 9, Love Hangover by Diana Ross. There are certain songs that seem to glide into the room like perfume in the air. Soft at first, then suddenly impossible to ignore. By 1976, Diana Ross had already become one of the defining voices of American soul. She had stepped beyond her years with the Supremes and was firmly planted in a new chapter as a solo artist. R&B and disco were beginning to merge on dance floors across the country, and music was learning how to stretch late into the night. Love Hangover captured that moment perfectly. The record begins almost like a whisper, slow, dreamy, and intimate. Just a voice floating above gentle instrumentation. Then, almost unexpectedly, the rhythm shifts and the room transforms. The song turns into something alive and pulsing, the kind of groove that made people forget the hour while the dance floor stayed full. What made the performance so memorable wasn't just the structure of the song, but the playful freedom in Ross's voice. She moved through the track like someone enjoying the moment rather than controlling it. One small detail from the recording has become part of music lore. During the session, Ross reportedly began laughing spontaneously while singing, something the producers decided to keep in the final cut. That laugh gave the record a human warmth you can't manufacture. For many listeners, this was the sound of evenings that stretched longer than expected. The kind of night where music, friends, and the rhythm of the room made time feel unimportant. And decades later, that feeling still lingers. Some songs don't just play. They remind us how it felt to be young when the night was still wide open. Number 8. Love Come Down by Evelyn Champagne, King.
I just can't love the way that I feel.
Some records arrive with a kind of effortless sparkle. The moment the rhythm begins, you can almost see the lights of a dance floor flickering somewhere in the distance. By the early 1980s, R&B was shifting again.
My love come down. Ooh, you make my love.
Disco had softened, synthesizers were stepping forward, and the groove of the music felt lighter on its feet. Into that moment stepped Evelyn Champagne, King, with a voice that sounded both joyful and commanding at the same time. Love Come Down, released in 1982, became one of those songs that simply refused to sit still. The bass line bounced. The rhythm carried a smooth, steady pulse. And above it all, King's voice floated with a bright confidence that felt like celebration. What made her delivery so memorable was the way she balanced strength with playfulness. She didn't overpower the track. She danced through it, letting the melody carry the emotion. One small detail from the recording still stands out. Producers kept the arrangement intentionally uncluttered, leaving space for the groove to breathe. That decision allowed her voice to move freely, almost like another instrument in the rhythm section.
You make my love come down inside of me.
For many listeners, this song became tied to very specific memories. Saturday nights, car radios, maybe a living room where someone pushed the furniture aside to make a little room for dancing. It was the kind of record that reminded people music could simply be fun. Not complicated, not heavy, just a moment of joy moving through the air. And sometimes that's exactly what we needed. Because in life, the songs that lift us up are often the ones we carry the longest. Number 7, If You Don't Know Me By Now, by Teddy Pendergrass. Some voices didn't need to push very hard to fill a room. The moment they arrived, everything else simply stepped aside. By the late 1970s, Teddy Pendergrass had become one of the most powerful presences in R&B. His years with Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes had already introduced audiences to that deep, commanding baritone. A voice that could sound both strong and vulnerable in the same breath.
You'll never know me. Oh, hey.
If You Don't Know Me By Now, released in 1972, became one of the defining soul ballads of the decade. The song arrived during a time when R&B slow jams weren't just background music. They were the center of the room. Couples leaned closer, conversations softened, and the singer's voice carried emotions people sometimes struggled to say themselves. Pendergrass didn't treat the song like a performance. He treated it like a conversation.
Me, like I trust in you.
His phrasing stretched and bent gently around the melody, as if each line were being spoken directly to someone sitting across from him. One small detail made his delivery unforgettable: the way he allowed space between the words. That patience created a tension that pulled listeners deeper into the story. The song spoke to a moment many people eventually recognize in their lives: the realization that love isn't always about proving yourself. Sometimes it's about being understood without explanation. For listeners who grew up with this record, it often played during quiet evenings, long talks, or moments when two people were trying to figure out where they truly stood with one another. And decades later, that voice still carries the same weight. Because when a singer truly means what they're saying, you don't just hear it, you believe it. Number 6, The Star-Spangled Banner by Whitney Houston. There are performances that feel less like a recording and more like a moment frozen in time. In January of 1991, the country was tense. The Gulf War had just begun, and the mood across the United States carried a quiet uncertainty. On Super Bowl Sunday in Tampa, the crowd expected the usual ceremony before the game. What they received instead was something that would echo for decades. Whitney Houston stepped onto the field in a simple tracksuit, calm and composed. When she began singing the national anthem, something changed in the stadium almost immediately. Her voice didn't rush. It rose slowly, with control and clarity, filling the space with a kind of strength that felt both proud and deeply human. What made the performance unforgettable wasn't vocal gymnastics or showmanship. It was the steadiness. Each phrase carried the weight of the moment without forcing it. Behind the scenes, the recording used a carefully prepared backing track to ensure the sound carried clearly through the massive stadium speakers. But the emotional power came entirely from Whitney herself. People watching at home often remember exactly where they were when they heard it. Some stood in their living rooms. Some simply sat quietly, listening. Years later, that performance would return to the charts after the events of September 11th, becoming a symbol of resilience and unity for another generation. Whitney Houston's voice could soar higher than almost anyone's. But what made her truly special was something simpler. She knew when to let the emotion speak for itself. And in that moment, the entire country seemed to breathe with her. Number 5, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye.
We don't need to escalate.
Sometimes a song arrives at exactly the moment the world needs to hear it. In 1971, Marvin Gaye was already a star at Motown, known for smooth romantic hits that played constantly on the radio. But the country around him was changing. The Vietnam War, civil unrest, and generational tension were part of everyday conversation.
What's going on? Hey, what's going on?
The mood felt heavier than the music many artists were releasing. Then came What's Going On. The record didn't burst onto the radio with energy. It drifted in gently, soft percussion, a relaxed groove, and Marvin's voice layered over itself in a way that felt almost like a quiet conversation. What made the song so powerful was its tone. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't accusing. He simply sounded like someone trying to understand the world around him.
Somebody thinks we're wrong, they do.
Motown founder Berry Gordy initially resisted releasing the song. It was too different, too political for the label's usual formula. But Marvin stood his ground, insisting the record mattered. And it did. For many listeners, the song became more than music. It felt like a mirror reflecting the times they were living through. Some heard it while driving late at night, the radio glowing softly in the dashboard. Others remember it playing through open apartment windows on warm summer evenings.
Wait, to bring some understanding. Hey.
The questions Marvin asked in that song still feel familiar decades later. And perhaps that's why it continues to resonate. Because sometimes the most honest music isn't trying to give us answers. It's simply brave enough to ask the question. Number 4, Back to Black by Amy Winehouse.
Downstairs in a bar, your rolled up sleeves.
Some songs don't sound like they belong to a particular year. They feel older than that, like echoes from another era that somehow found their way into the present. When Amy Winehouse released Back to Black in 2006, it immediately carried the atmosphere of classic soul records from decades earlier. The production leaned into the sound of chickish girl groups, tight rhythm sections, distant drums, and a darkness that hung gently behind the melody. But the voice at the center of it all was unmistakably modern. Winehouse sang with a rawness that felt almost uncomfortable at times in the best possible way. There was no attempt to smooth the edges. Her phrasing cracked, stretched, and leaned into the pain of the story she was telling. The song itself spoke about heartbreak, but not the tidy kind that resolves itself neatly. This was the kind of heartbreak that lingers long after the relationship ends. The kind people try to outrun, but eventually learn they must simply live through.
I was trouble, yeah, you know that I'm the
One small moment in the recording still stands out. The way Amy pulls back during certain lines, almost whispering the pain rather than pushing it forward. That restraint gave the song its haunting quality. For many listeners, Back to Black became tied to late nights and quiet reflections. It was the kind of record people played when they were alone with their thoughts. Amy Winehouse carried an old soul inside a very young life.
You know that I'm the
And when you listen closely, you can still hear the honesty she poured into every note. Some voices tell stories. Hers sounded like it had lived them. Number 3, Fire and Desire, by Rick James and Tina Marie.
I used to use and abuse them.
Every now and then, a duet comes along that feels less like two singers sharing a microphone, and more like two stories colliding in the same moment. By the early 1980s, Rick James had already carved out a bold place in R&B. His sound was unapologetic, funk-driven, dramatic, and filled with personality. But Fire and Desire, released in 1981 with Tina Marie, revealed another side of him entirely.
With every measure.
The song unfolded slowly, almost like a conversation that had been waiting to happen. R&B during that period was beginning to blend deeper emotional storytelling with lush studio production. Ballads stretched longer, voices carried more vulnerability, and this duet leaned fully into that mood. Rick James began the song with a rough, aching honesty. His voice didn't try to hide its weariness. It sounded like someone admitting regret out loud.
I wasn't very nice, I know.
Then Tina Marie answered him, her voice soaring with warmth and clarity, creating a contrast that gave the song its emotional weight. One beautiful detail from the recording was how naturally their voices intertwined. Neither singer tried to overpower the other. Instead, the tension between their styles became the heartbeat of the song. For many listeners, Fire and Desire became the soundtrack for complicated love. The kind of love where feelings were strong, but life had already created distance between two people. It wasn't a neat story. It felt real. And that's why so many people still return to it decades later.
Your lips and you
Because sometimes the songs we remember most aren't the happy ones. They're the ones that sound like truth. If you're still listening tonight, you're probably someone who remembers these voices the way we do. Subscribing helps keep these stories and the music behind them alive for the next quiet evening like this one. And there are still 2 names left to remember. Number 2, Don't Look Any Further, by Dennis Edwards.
Oh girl, don't look any further.
Some songs feel like they're walking beside you rather than performing for you. When Dennis Edwards released Don't Look Any Further in 1984, R&B was settling into a smooth, confident groove. The early wave of funk had softened, and producers were leaning into deeper bass lines, steady drum machines, and melodies that moved like a slow evening breeze. Edwards already had a remarkable history by then. Years earlier, his powerful voice had helped carry the Temptations through one of their most successful eras. But this record revealed something quieter, something more reflective.
I'll still be looking in your
Don't Look Any Further didn't rush its message. The rhythm moved patiently, almost hypnotically, while Edwards delivered the lyrics with a calm assurance that felt grounded and mature. What made the recording especially memorable was the duet arrangement with Sita Garrett. Her voice floated lightly above the groove, creating a gentle contrast with Edwards' deeper tone. Together, they created a conversation that felt both intimate and reassuring. For many listeners, the song carried a simple promise: the idea that love doesn't always need searching or a chasing. Sometimes the right person is already standing close enough to hear the music with you. It became one of those records people played during long nighttime drives, when the city lights stretched quietly along the road ahead. The song didn't demand attention. It simply settled into your memory. And once it was there, it tended to stay. Number 1. I'll Be Missing You by Faith Evans and Puff Daddy, featuring 112.
This right here, tell me what goes out to everyone.
Some songs arrive after loss, and sometimes they help us understand it. In 1997, the music world was still absorbing the shock of losing the notorious B.I.G., one of the most influential voices of his generation. In the weeks that followed, grief moved through the industry and through fans who had followed his music closely. I'll Be Missing You was born out of that moment. Built around the familiar melody from The Police's Every Breath You Take, the record transformed that haunting rhythm into something entirely different: a tribute, a memory, and a public farewell. Faith Evans' voice carried the emotional center of the song. She didn't sing with theatrical sorrow. Instead, her delivery felt steady and sincere, as if speaking directly to someone who could no longer answer. One detail that made the recording powerful was how simply it was arranged. The music stayed restrained, allowing the words and emotion to breathe. For listeners who heard the song in those first months after its release, it often became tied to their own experiences with loss. Not just the loss of an artist, but the quiet reminders of people who had once been part of their own lives. Music has a way of holding space for those memories, and sometimes a single song becomes the place where we return to them. Because even when the voices themselves are gone, the music keeps remembering for us. If there's one thing time teaches us, it's that music doesn't really disappear. The voices may fall silent, the headlines fade, years pass quietly in between, but the songs remain exactly where we left them, waiting patiently for the moment we hear them again. And when they return, they often bring pieces of our own lives with them: a car ride, a living room radio, someone we once loved. Thank you for spending these moments remembering with us tonight. If you'd like to keep these memories going, there's another story waiting on the screen: Texas Soul, 10 R&B pioneers who changed music forever. Another collection of voices that shaped the sound of their time. Whenever you're ready, we'll open that door together.